Okay, so we've got a really interesting set of sources here about the attempted assassination of President Reagan. It's a story that just seems to have so many layers to it. We have some excerpts from the American History Tellers podcast and some other fascinating stuff. It's one of those events that, goes way beyond just the headlines. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. It really did have a big impact on everything. I mean, Reagan's presidency, obviously, but also on security measures and even gun control legislation.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think it all happened on what seemed like such a normal day. March 30th, 1981, just a cloudy day in D.C. President Reagan's leaving a speaking engagement at the Washington Hilton. Crowds are gathered. Like you said, everything seemed pretty routine.
Yeah, I mean, totally normal, right? And yet, blended right into the crowd is John Hinckley Jr. The sources are pretty clear about his motive, too. It was all about trying to impress actress Jodie Foster.
Yeah, obsessed might be a better word for it, right? I mean, the sources really do go into detail on like how much he was modeling himself after Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. It's actually kind of scary to think about.
Yeah,
Buying guns, practicing at the range, like all of that.
it really is. And it makes you wonder, like, where's that line between fandom and just, I don't know, pure obsession?
Yeah.
But, meanwhile, you have the Secret Service who are completely on edge, especially after, what happened with JFK. They had all these procedures in place, super meticulous.
But then how did Hinckley manage to get through all of that security? If they were so prepared, I mean, how did this even happen?
I know, right? I mean, that's kind of the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really shows how unpredictable things can be. I mean, you can try to plan for everything. You can prepare, but you can't control human behavior.
Yeah, and this all happened so fast, too. I mean, the whole thing, we're talking seconds. He fires 6 shots, and not just any bullets either. These were specially designed exploding bullets, which the sources really emphasize how dangerous those were. Like, it was planned. This wasn't random.
Oh, no, totally planned. Imagine, like, you're there, total chaos, people diving for cover, gunshots ringing out, and nobody knows who's been hit.
It must have been absolutely crazy. And then, in the middle of all of this, Secret Service agent Jerry Parr makes this split-second decision. The sources say this probably saved Reagan's life.
Yeah, pushes Reagan into the limo, like goes totally against protocol and tells the driver, get us to the hospital now. Talk about courage under pressure.
Absolutely. And this whole time, like, nobody even knows if Reagan has been hit. It's all just tense and uncertain. The limo is racing to George Washington University Hospital. It's a crazy scene.
Yeah, and then back at the Hilton, it's like the whole thing is just starting to sink in. I mean, you have Press Secretary James Brady, Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, and D.C. police officer Thomas Delahanty. All of them are wounded. All victims.
And it's just like, it's so easy to forget that in these big events, these are real people, real lives affected.
Absolutely. And the sources are really good at portraying this human side. Like, okay, you've got the hospital, people are frantic, doctors are running everywhere trying to save lives. Reagan collapses as soon as he gets there. And at first they think, oh, it's a heart attack.
Wait, how did they miss a bullet wound?
Well, apparently the entry wound was small, like really easy to miss in all the chaos. But then they find it, a collapsed lung, a bullet right near his heart. And suddenly it's like, oh, wow, this is bad.
So you have this whole medical drama happening, and then on top of that, there's like a political crisis happening back in D.C.
Yeah.
The sources describe these press conferences as total chaos. Conflicting information, the administration seems completely unprepared for this.
It makes you think, right?
Yeah.
About what happens to governments when things like this go down.
Hmm.
People want answers, but all they're getting is confusion.
And then there's Secretary of State Alexander Haig. I mean, remember that. He comes out and says he's in control. I don't think that went over very well.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about pouring fuel on the fire. That's when everyone started talking about the 25th Amendment. Like, is there going to be this power vacuum? What's going to happen?
Yeah, the 25th Amendment. It's pretty intense stuff. It's basically there for when the president is unable to do their job. And with all the chaos, people are like, well, what if that's the case right now?
Right, exactly. I mean, it definitely added to the uncertainty. So you have Reagan in surgery, and then all this is happening in D.C. The sources really talk about all the pressure Dr. Benjamin Aaron must have been feeling in that operating room.
Can you imagine? Trying to save the president's life. It doesn't get much more intense than that. But even through all of this, Reagan is like cracking jokes with the doctors. He's asking who's minding the store. It's almost unbelievable considering how seriously injured he was.
It is.
Yeah.
But that's the thing about Reagan. I mean, he really had this amazing ability to connect with people, even in situations like this. And that humor, that composure, is what people remember about him.
And the image of him signing legislation from his hospital bed, what a message that sent.
Yeah, I'm not giving up. I'm not going to let this stop me. And then, of course, we have John Hinckley Jr., the trial, the insanity defense.
And the public's reaction, that was wild.
It was so much outrage, so much confusion. It was like, did justice even happen? And this whole thing really sparked this massive national conversation about mental health and the justice system.
And the story of James Brady, one of the victims, he suffered permanent brain damage, partial paralysis, and still became a huge advocate for gun control.
Yeah, his story is incredible and ultimately led to the Brady Bill in 1993, like turning this awful thing into something good.
Absolutely. It's amazing how a single event can create a movement like that. So, okay, we've talked about Reagan, the victims, but there's also this term, Teflon president. People use it a lot when they talk about Reagan. What does that even mean? And does it really apply to him?
It's a good question. I mean, the whole Teflon president thing, it wasn't just about him being charming or anything. You have to remember what the political climate was like before the assassination attempt.
You mean like Reagan wasn't this beloved figure before this all went down?
Yeah, exactly. He had a ton of critics. His policies were really controversial. Some people thought he was totally out of touch. But the interesting thing is, the sources suggest that surviving this actually made him more popular.
Okay, but that doesn't really make sense, does it? I mean, how does almost dying make you more popular as president?
Well, it's about how the story gets told.
Yeah.
This whole event, it changed how people saw him. He went from this really divisive figure to a symbol of strength. Like, he faced death and came back even stronger.
So it was like the whole country was rooting for him to pull through.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And all that support, well, it gave him a lot of political power.
Mm.
And he used it. He pushed through his agenda, like the tax cuts we talked about before. It's actually kind of fascinating how something so personal can become so political.
Okay, so maybe the Teflon president thing makes a bit more sense now. But, I mean, there were some pretty big screw-ups too, right? Like the whole Hague situation, that was a mess.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The sources don't try to hide that. Those press conferences were chaotic, conflicting information everywhere. Hague basically trying to grab power. It definitely looked like the administration had no idea what they were doing.
But then you have these Secret Service agents who are practically heroes. Like, it's such a stark contrast.
It really is. Like, even in the middle of all that chaos, people can still do amazing things. I mean, think about Jerry Parr. If it wasn't for him, Reagan might not have made it.
Yeah, but you can't help but think about the pressure they must have been under. They're human, after all.
Right, exactly. And the sources really show that human side of it all. The fear, the not knowing what was going on, trying to make sense of this crazy event.
We've talked a lot about politics and security and everything, but this was about people, you know? Real people's lives were affected.
Definitely. And I mean, not just the big names like the president or the press secretary. What about all the other people who were there that day? The people who got caught in the crossfire, the people who just witnessed it all happen.
It makes you wonder, how do you ever really recover from something like that?
That's something the sources don't really go into, which is a shame. The trauma, the lasting effects on everyone's mental health, not just the victims, but their families, everyone who was there that day.
And then there's Hinckley himself. The whole trial, the insanity defense, how the public reacted to it, it really made the whole country think differently about mental illness and the justice system.
Yeah, definitely. And it wasn't like a clear-cut debate either. There were strong arguments on both sides.
Like, on one side, you have people saying, look, if someone is that mentally ill, they shouldn't be held responsible for their actions.
But then there's also the whole public safety issue. How do you protect people while also being compassionate?
Yeah, it's tough. And the Hinckley case forced everyone to deal with those questions. Lawmakers, regular people, everyone. It led to some pretty big changes in how the insanity defense works in federal courts.
And it's still something people are debating today. There's no easy answer, but we have to keep talking about it.
Shows that something like this, it doesn't just end when it's over. It keeps affecting things.
Absolutely. It makes us rethink things, look at things from different angles.
It's all about connecting those dots. You know, how individual decisions, political stuff, social movements, even random chance, how it all comes together to shape history.
And how those moments in history continue to affect us, even today.
I've learned so much in this deep dive. It's incredible how much there is to uncover with this one event.
Yeah, it's like the more you learn, the more there is to learn.
Yeah.
You have the drama of the shooting itself, the race to save Reagan's life, all the political games going on.
And then all the legal stuff, the policy debates, changes in gun control, presidential security, all of that.
So many different parts of this one story.
And it all comes back to this question of leadership. what it means to be in charge, to deal with a crisis like this, to make choices that affect so many people.
Yeah, it's a heavy burden, right?
Yep.
Making those decisions, knowing they have such a huge impact, not just on individuals, but on the whole country.
We've talked about a lot of different things in this deep dive, but if there's one thing you want our listeners to remember, what would it be?
I'd say it's about going deeper than just the surface of events. It's about seeing the complexities, all the different sides, all the human stories that are part of it.
Because history is more than just facts and dates, right? It's a conversation that we're all a part of.
Exactly. And the more we know, the more we think about it, the better we'll be able to handle whatever challenges come our way.
That's a great way to put it. This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about, a lot to talk about, and who knows, maybe it'll inspire our listener to go out and learn even more.
Yeah, it really does make you think about all those what if moments, like how different things could have been. But, thinking about something else we touched on before, Reagan's image. The sources talk about this Teflon president thing, like nothing bad could stick to him. Was that really true?
It's interesting. It wasn't just luck or charm or something. The sources are right. It was a lot of things. Like his communication skills were a big part of it.
Right. He was the great communicator.
Right?
Exactly. He could connect with people, explain complicated things in a way everyone could understand. And he was a great storyteller. He'd use stories and humor in his speeches. It made him seem, I don't know, more real.
But I mean, do you think the assassination attempt had anything to do with his image? Like, did it change how people saw him?
I think it definitely did.
Mm.
Like, before the attempt, there were a lot of people who didn't like him, didn't agree with his policies. But then after, there was this huge wave of support for him. Everyone was pulling for him to get better.
It's like the whole country was united.
Yeah, and it made it harder to criticize him. And I think his team was smart about it. They used that to their advantage. They presented him as this strong leader who wouldn't give up.
Yeah, it's crazy how something so terrible could actually help him politically. It makes you wonder how much of that image is real and how much is just, carefully planned.
It's hard to say, isn't it? There's always some level of, putting on a show in politics. But Reagan was really good at it.
Yeah.
And it worked. People believed in him.
This has been so fascinating. Honestly, I had no idea how much I didn't know about this whole thing.
It's one of those events where the more you look into it, the more you realize how much there is to learn. You have the shooting itself, the doctors trying to save his life, all the political stuff happening at the same time.
And then the trial, the arguments about gun control, changes to how they protect the president.
It's not just one story. It's like a bunch of stories all connected together.
Yeah, and it really makes you think about what it means to be a leader, Having to handle something like this, make tough decisions that affect everyone.
It makes you realize the pressure they must be under, the choices they make. They have consequences, and not just for them, but for the whole country.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the attempted assassination of President Reagan, is there, one big thing you hope people listening take away from this?
I think it's this. Don't just accept what you see on the surface. Look deeper. There are so many layers to these events, so many different perspectives and human stories.
Because history is more than just facts and dates.
Exactly. It's a conversation.
Yeah.
And we're all a part of it. And the more we understand it, the better we can be at handling the stuff that happens in our own time.
That's a perfect way to end this. It's been really eye-opening. And who knows, maybe it'll even get people to go out and learn more on their own. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.